Hi, I'm Dallyn Vico, and you are on the Maybe Planet.
Yeah, hi Dallyn.
Hi,
we're very glad to have you on the show because you have a voice that we don't hear often in the medias, you know, UFO medias and all that.
Yes, I'm one of those guys that basically says that you know, aliens never landed in the school.
Yeah.
Whereas as the popular people always like to say, yes, it happened, and they like to, you know, exaggerate and do all those types of things. And you know, online, especially now, everybody's gone alien crazy.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm one of the very few voices that are saying, slowly, you know, let's really understand what is going on before we jump to conclusions and just we see a satellite and we assume that it's an alien spaceship. So it's good to have that other voice, I think. Yeah. Even though there's a lot of criticism and backlash.
Yeah.
You gotta stand up for truth.
Yeah. On the Twitter and all that, I can imagine that you had some bad backlash from the documentary. But so where do you always been in Rua, Zimbabwe? You're a native from there?
So I grew up in Zimbabwe. Since then, I've lived in Europe. I've lived in South Africa, and I was out of Zimbabwe for about 15 years, and I'm now back in Zimbabwe, just living here for the time being.
In the same place?
Oh, well, not in Rua. I live in Harare, which is this city. And yeah, and I'll be visiting America shortly as well. I'll be going to America on the 15th for a short holiday.
Okay. And so how many time did you spend in the Ariel School actually when you were a child?
Well, I was just from grade 1 to grade 7, so
6 years.
Yeah, something like that. 6-7 years. Yeah, when I was a kid, you know, junior school.
Yeah, but it was quite a long time to be there and to. What was the senior you were in when this happened? You know, September of '94. How old were you?
How old was I? I don't know. Between the ages of 8 and 9, maybe. I'm not sure. You know, it was so long ago. I mean, I'm now turning 40 this year. So you know, time is kind of elusive sometimes on those. Just so many years ago.
Yeah, long time ago.
Trying to remember when you were 9 years old what you were doing and what you were thinking.
And actually, what are your recollections from that day?
Oh, my recollections from that day. I mean, it depends on what aspect of the day and of the evening. You know, I remember going to school in the morning with my mother, and her dropping me off. And I remember, you know, if I look back, I remember the week I was at school, what was happening during that week. And then from there, I remember obviously the day that it supposedly happened. You know, and you know, obviously there's some shadows in my memory because I mean it was a long time ago.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but I, you know, to the best of my recollection, you know, I kind of like have a story or a picture in my mind of what happened, you know, during that time.
Imaginary picture or a picture that you?
Well, I've tried to you know, remove all the imagination and try and become as logical and as factual as possible in my older years. You know, because you don't want to live in an imagination. You want to live in truth and reality.
Yeah. But for a long time, you had that. You changed in a way your memories about that because in a way, not the memories, but the story you had about them. Because and I wanted to know why you decided in your life now to testify in that documentary.
Because of you know, you get to a certain age where you don't really care what people think.
Yeah. Okay.
you don't really care what the crowd has to say. You are going to stand in your own truth. And, you know, the older you become, when you become a man, you know, truth becomes very important to you. And because you're a part of the global, you know, village of humanity. And, you know, you want to contribute to humanity. You don't want to be a part of the problem. You know, there's too much lies and too much misconceptions and too much stories, you know, and make believe and fantasy in this world. And, you know, you know, I want to give a little bit of truth to the story, you know, my story and my life. And, you know, when you're younger, you know, there's peer pressure there, you know, when you're younger, it's more difficult when you're younger to tell the truth, especially when you've got other people. But when you get to an adult, it becomes easier to tell the truth, because you know, that's what you learn to do, is tell the truth and not to lie.
When did you know before the interviews, the new interviews, that it was a Steven Spielberg production and it was going to be on Netflix? Did you know that?
Well, I just obviously got called by Netflix. Obviously, they were doing their research. For the last 20 years, I've had alien chasers contacting me. You know,
of course,
and wanting to hear about my story for 20 years. And then you know, so Netflix obviously contacted me and wanted to do the interview with me. At first, I said no. And the gentleman was just a really nice guy. So I was like, okay, cool. Well, I don't mind doing you a favor. I'm going to be in Zimbabwe anyway. I was visiting my mother at the time. And they offered to pay for me and all of that. And I said, sorry, I don't need your money. I don't need you to buy me an airplane ticket. I'm coming to Zimbabwe. I don't mind coming to my old school, because it's nice for me also to come and see my old school where I grew up.
Which was very nice.
You know? And remember all where I played and on the playground. So that was quite interesting for me.
And did you have the opportunity to meet again your old schoolmates there while the interviews?
No, I've kept in contact with some of my good friends from school. But when during the interviews with Netflix, they kept everybody that they were interviewing separate. And so I didn't know who they were interviewing, and I didn't see anybody when I was there. Everybody separate, and everybody did their own thing and told their own truths or own stories.
And what did you think about the Encounters documentary?
I thought it was very good. I thought that it was very balanced. I think that Netflix did a great job of trying to, you know, we had obviously a 3-hour documentary, and they can't obviously put you know, everything that I said into a documentary. So they try to, you know, they try to make it as balanced as possible between what I was saying and what the other people were saying. And, you know, obviously they have to edit certain parts out in order to make it fit. And so I think they did a fantastic job.
But it's very interesting because you had actually the same point of view of what happened. The same when I looked at an interview of 2008 from Randall Nickerson, I think the Ariel phenomenon. You had an interview with him, and you said the same story about the same story as the girls who are in the Encounters documentary. On YouTube, you have an interview, and I wanted to know why did you follow this narrative about the alien? How was it in your mind, your mindset at that time?
I don't know what you saw in that I don't know what you saw in that documentary. I have always maintained that I never saw any aliens walking around.
Okay.
And if you watch the Randall Nixon documentaries, you know, I was always talking about something that I had seen in the sky that I wasn't sure what it was.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. To be precise.
And that never changed until I got to a little, you know, obviously older, and I started to really start examining, you know, from a logical perspective, what I had seen, and what I had learned in my later life about, you know, aliens and about spirituality and about, you know, obviously the physics. And so, you've got to come to a point where you are able to look beyond your own thoughts and step out of yourself and look at it very critically about what you actually observed, not what you think you observed.
Yeah, your guesses. Yeah, okay.
So, and so I try to make the most logical assumptions about what happened during that day and what I observed. And then obviously during that time, did my own research to find out more about what was transpiring, not only in Zimbabwe during that day, but what was happening in other countries during that time.
Yeah. And the movies also, and everywhere, and X-Files, and all the mythology about aliens at that time. So it was, and so that day, you remember, as you explained in the documentary, you remember to have been inventing a game in a way to just skip the school, skip the I don't know what was the language again.
I knew that the kids were lying, and they were not lying, but they were playing imaginary games, and they were expanding upon what they thought they had seen. I clearly knew that there were no aliens running around the school, because the so-called spaceship that landed, I could clearly see with my eyes that was a rock. And and when you're a kid, you can look at something and you can make these imaginary games.
Yeah, sure.
And pretend like what you're seeing is something,
but did you start it?
You can fantasize.
Yeah. Did you start it to call that alien ship? The first one?
No,
the first one?
No, I was not the first one there. But I walked over to where the logs were, where the kids were doing this. And I was actually older than the kids, the grade 1s and grade 2s that were doing this. But instead of taking the mature route and, explaining to them and showing them that it's actually a rock and giving more of a voice to reason and logic and truth, I allowed them to continue this charade. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought, wow, look how fast this is spreading. I'm going to be able to bunk classes, because everybody's going to be talking about this. And, this is going to be the topic of the day.
Of the day, and of the month afterwards, and of maybe centuries. No, I'm kidding, but it was like a big subject, and how was your mindset when you... are you freezed? No, it's okay. How was your mindset when you start seeing local papers coming, local journalists coming, and after John Mack come in to interview the children and all that? Was it crazy for you? Because it should have been very, knowing that it was not true in your mind.
It was. I thought it was very funny, and
funny?
And it was like an inside. It was like almost like an inside joke in a way.
Oh my God!
Where you know the truth, and you see NASA space, because obviously I didn't know that NASA was going to come and send people, and I didn't ever expect
NASA came,
and of course since that day it hasn't stopped. I've like I said, I've been getting contacted for 20 years about this. And
like a twister.
It's like just a crazy situation. And I'm back in the same spot as well. I just place for the Wi-Fi. The NASA came down, and but a lot of it just doesn't make logical sense at all, to be very honest with you. And that's why after NASA and these other space agencies came, you never heard anything from it since then. I believe that if NASA or what these big space agencies actually had discovered something, it would have been, they would have made a new proper press conference, but they never did, because nothing ever happened. And a lot of rumors, a lot of stories, but no, it never happened.
Have you been interviewed by John Mack?
No, I was never introduced by John Mack. I don't know. I think maybe so long ago, I don't think I was ever interviewed by him. I was interviewed by a lady, I remember.
Yep.
But I was never interviewed by him. We were asked to write a story about what we had all experienced, and we were promised that we would get some video or something if we wrote the story. It was like a prize. whoever wrote the best story or whoever wrote the story about what happened. But of course, I was never selected and I never got the prize, maybe because my version of the events was slightly different to the rest of the kids.
Okay. And so when Netflix contacted you, was it, you said already what you wanted to say to them?
So I had a preliminary chat with the guy from Netflix, and I basically said to him, look, I don't think you want to interview me because my story is very different to everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think it's going to go well with what your narrative and what you guys are talking about. And he said, well, explain it to me. And I explained to him, well, you know, it never happened. And then he said, well, that's fascinating. Can you tell me more? And obviously we had a chat. And he said, well, I think we still want you on the documentary. We still would like to interview you.
Yeah.
You know, are you able to do that? And I said, sure, no problem. I don't mind.
But it's very interesting because it's the first time that everybody is saying that it happened and just one person tells that it never happened. And usually there's nobody believes in UFOs, and it's the contrary. Yeah. So
and there's people that argue with me even though they weren't there, trying to tell me that no, it happened, and I'm saying no, it never happened, and they'll still argue with me, saying that you know, I'm lying or whatever.
And those your schoolmates we can see in the encounters, do they argue with you still about what you said in the documentary?
If you're talking about the first documentary, then you know, some of the boys obviously you know, today I'm friends with, and we have a good laugh about it because, you know, they didn't see anything, and they acknowledge that, you know, privately to me. But the most recent documentary that was done, I don't consider any of those people that are on the documentary my friends or my close acquaintances. I haven't seen those people for years and years and years. And so, you know, we're not really friends. So yeah, I had a different group of friends.
Okay. And was it a burden for you at one point?
It's never been a burden for me. It's never been a burden. It's never been a worry or a stress.
Just a funny thing.
It's just another day. And, you know, it's had no impact whatsoever on my life. No, the interview hasn't had an impact on my life. Twitter hasn't had an impact on my life. Netflix hasn't had an impact on my life. You know, some people are so excited to be on TV or any of that, and I'm just like, it doesn't do anything for me, to be honest.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
And so what? So you never, and even a ship. When you say in the documentary in 2008, you said you were seeing lights and maybe something moving. It was the sun, actually.
Well, from my research, there was a spaceship, a Russian spaceship or a Russian vehicle, space. You know, call it a spaceship. That basically was, from what I understand, was descending into Earth orbit, and it basically blew up, and then bits of it basically came down to Earth. That's what it could have been, or it could have been a satellite that was just basically flashing its little lights. And when you're 9 years old or 8 years old, you know, everybody's talking about aliens running around the playground. You know, also question yourself after a while and think, well, you know, I'm seeing these lights. Maybe it's something. Maybe, you know, and then you question yourself. You question your own sanity. But you know, as you get older, you start to really, you know, you look at things from an adult's perspective, not from a child's perspective.
Yeah, sure. But when we see the two women, for example, in the documentary, they don't. When you look in their eyes, they don't lie in a way. Maybe it's their recollection of the events, but they don't seem to be liars.
Well, you know what? I'm happy to put money on it. We can do a lie detector test any day.
No, but I'm just wondering because it's very interesting to have to see those persons very believing in it, being very traumatized in a way by what they saw, what they think they saw, and so it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Look, I mean, you know, you can lie to yourself so much that eventually you believe your lies, and then you become convincing. And
especially for children. Yeah, sure.
So, you know, I'm standing in my truth. And, you know, if you want to talk about aliens, from my knowledge, I look back in history. So, if we want to talk about aliens, we have to go right back to what we've learned in history. And, in today's version of aliens, it really came from this idea of demons and angels. And, if you really are, really study, aliens, you'll come across a lot of ideas that, in fact, the aliens are really demons. And I just don't understand why because, the idea of these aliens are not good as far as all the knowledge is. I'm sure you guys have done your own research. So I don't understand why so-called demons would be hanging around with a bunch of innocent kids, and feeding off innocent kids' energy, because there's no negative energy to feed off of. So, from the spiritual side, and from the logical side, to travel so many thousands and thousands of miles to land at a school for half an hour, turn around and to disappear after traveling trillions of miles away. And if I was an alien and I'm so advanced, I would want to go to decision makers, adults that can actually have a voice, not some bunch of kids that are in the middle of Zimbabwe, in the middle of Africa. I mean, they would go to the biggest energy draw.
But they have a documentary on Netflix now.
Sorry?
They have a documentary on Netflix now.
Well, they have a documentary on Netflix. Well, absolutely. But
maybe they need to smoke a cigarette. And they can't smoke in the ship.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Maybe.
But and were you interested by what happened in 2017 with the New York Times article about Pentagon and UFOs, the Tic Tac videos, and also about what happened in the Congress this last year with David Grush and all that? Are you interested in UFO stories? And
no,
do you follow?
Really.
No.
Okay. I mean, I see sound bites where there's a certain UFO people in America saying that the American government needs to be more transparent, and they've, I think, assembled some sort of like research team, and you're always going to have people looking for that, and there's ideas and there's videos floating around online with orbs that are floating around. I myself have looked at technologies, and I've seen some very advanced technologies that could potentially be misconstrued as UFOs, even within America's airspace. But those technologies definitely weren't in Zimbabwe during that time. And I maintain today that 100% there were no UFOs flying around and landing in our school. It's just never happened. Some people will take these lies to their deathbed, and I'm alive. Why must I take it to my deathbed? I'm going to tell the truth now.
Yeah. It's very courageous to say that you say today.
Yeah. But if you don't care about the social media, I can. Yeah. I hear you.
I mean, people have told me that people are saying bad things about me on Twitter. I've never even bothered to even go on Twitter and even look. I mean, when I was told that the Netflix documentary was out, I didn't even bother to even download it and even look at it. Like months later, I looked at it because it's like I don't need to see myself talking. And I don't need to see what everybody else is saying because I know the truth. I was there.
So those events in your life are like peanuts.
A blip in my life.
Okay.
Yeah. They have absolutely no impression on my life, other than I've had a few good laughs with some friends, for about 5 minutes, and that's really what it was. And during our whole time in junior school, after that incident, what's very interesting is that no one ever spoke about it again. It wasn't like a thing that we spoke about all the time in school, and everybody just forgot about it. And the only people that remembered about it were people like from Netflix. So chasing aliens and chasing Bigfoot and those kinds of things. So I'm happy to at least be giving a voice to truth. Where it's much easier for me to go on Netflix and lied about the whole situation and embellished. I could have told you what the aliens look like and the scales on their arms, and I could have come up with some very crazy and imaginative ideas. And if you really dive deep into the makers of this this whole situation and the people that came down and did the whole interview. What's very interesting is these same people, John Mack was deeply involved in making movies about aliens, you know, before he came to Zimbabwe. And all those pictures that the kids drew, it's very surprising that they all strikingly resemble movie pictures or frames of his very same movie. So I believe that he was actively involved in coaching and directing and leading the kids into drawing what he wanted them to draw. Oh, I know one of the main pictures on YouTube, a friend of mine drew, and a friend of mine is often laughing about it, saying he never saw anything. He just was asked to draw a picture of an alien. I mean, gentlemen, you've probably known about aliens since you were 8 years old watching cartoons. I mean, they've been making cartoons about aliens since the 60s. So it's not like we didn't have TVs and access to radio. And, you know, it's already imprinted into the human mind at a very young age. Anybody can draw a UFO. You know, it's just a, you know, I think people need to look at it from both angles and not be so quick to jump and believe. You know, if we as human beings really want to discover what's out there, we have to be very critical about what we're really researching and what we really you know, exploring. Otherwise, we'll end up spending so much time and resources looking, you know, in the total wrong direction, where we should be looking in a total different direction. So I don't want people to be, you know, misdirected if we are to try and find some sort of truth and know where we stand in the universe. You know, it's very important, you know, in terms of science and knowledge. You know,
and especially especially when you see now that political interests are in UFOs, and it can, you know, QAnon in the USA and all that, you know, they are grabbing, you know, the subject, and so it's crazy. It's America.
Every day on TikTok, you're seeing an alien and UFO sighting, but you know, I mean, I never saw it, never happened, as far as I'm concerned, and you know, it just doesn't make logical and scientific sense for a UFO to fly all the way to Earth from, like I said, from a distant galaxy, and then half an hour later turn around and fly off and just say, "Oh, look after the environment." I mean, people have been talking about looking after the environment for decades before I was even born. You know, Greta Thunberg wasn't the first person to stand up at the UN as a little girl and talk about the environment. There have been other little girls before Greta Thunberg was even a twinkle in her father's eye. So, you know, there's narratives and there's agendas, and, you know, at least somebody's standing up and saying, hey, you know, you might have used your, you know, your psychology on a bunch of kids in Africa, and you might have poked the bear, or there might have been some other element to it, but I'm, you know, I'm not a part and parcel of that, and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to be the guy that says, hey, you know, it never happened, and we have to be critical about what we're actually talking about and what we actually, you know, otherwise we're just perpetuating lies. I want people to find the truth. You know, don't get me wrong. It would be an amazing experience if aliens really did come down to Earth and really did give some sort of message to humanity. But, you know, history has shown, you know, even in terms of the oldest religions, that they came down and made us all slaves. You know, if those stories are to be believed, with the Anunnaki, and they weren't exactly very nice to us. No. You know, and so, you know, it would be nice if we had some benevolent alien species that came down and helped us and did things for us. But, you know, I think it's more of a spiritual thing. If there are such things as aliens, they would be interdimensional beings. And if they're interdimensional beings, by that very definition, they would be angels and demons. And I don't foresee angels or demons hanging around kids and kids' schools and kids' playgrounds. And I definitely don't see them inviting human beings onto their spaceship to take them off onto a distant galaxy or impregnating them. So, you know, you talk of the other people being very truthful. Doesn't sound to me like she was being very truthful, especially the fact that she's talking about what pills and what medication she's taking on top of talking about that in her interview.
Yeah, you're a wise man, Dallyn.
I've been around the block. I've done a lot of things in my life, a lot of very interesting things in my life.
Yeah.
Well, guys, well, I wish you all the best. I wish the French public the best.
For you too, Dallyn.
You know, search for real truth. You know, don't just imagine and hope for truth. search for real truth. It's very important.
Yeah. It was a real great pleasure to speak with you, Dallyn, today.
Thank you so much.
And likewise. Have a good evening, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dallyn Vico, and you are on the Maybe Planet.